The signal came without warning. No diplomat, no herald, no carefully worded transmission asking for permission to speak. Just a single tight beam broadcast, punching through every frequency the Galactic Council monitored, cutting across 17 star systems in the span of 3 seconds. The message was short. It was blunt. And it made the blood of every species that had blood run cold. This is Admiral Yara Chun of the United Earth Defense Fleet. The Verkai Armada has been destroyed. All 412 warships. We lost 9 of our own. If anyone has further questions about the engagement, please direct them to the debris field currently occupying Grid Sector 77 Alpha. That is all. The council chamber on Atheron Prime had never gone so quiet. Ambassador Kelvoth of the Soren Collective was the first to find his voice, though it came out smaller than he intended. He had lived for 230 years. He had sat through wars, collapses of empires, the death of stars discussed in dry political language. Nothing had prepared him for this. The Verkai were not some minor raiding fleet. They were the most feared military force in the known galaxy. 40 years of unchecked expansion. Dozens of civilizations either enslaved or erased. The Council itself had spent the better part of a decade simply trying to negotiate a buffer zone, begging the Verkai to stop at the edge of the outer rim, and humanity had destroyed them. In a single engagement, with 9 losses, Kelveth pulled up the sensor data being relayed from the nearest monitoring station. It was all there. Thermal signatures consistent with antimatter detonations on a scale the Council's own weapons technology couldn't produce. Drive signatures from human vessels moving at velocities that should have torn their hulls apart. And in the middle of it all, the cold, lifeless wreckage of 412 Verkai warships drifting in formation, almost like they had been arranged that way on purpose. They baited them, said Admiral Voss of the Farnic Union quietly. He was studying the tactical breakdown on his own screen, and the look on his four-eyed face was not triumph. It was something much closer to fear. Look at the approach vectors. The humans let the Verkai think they had a retreating convoy. They lured the entire armada into a narrow corridor between 2 gravitational bodies, and then he stopped. He didn't finish the sentence because the data finished it for him. The humans had detonated something inside the corridor. Not a weapon any of the Council's databases recognized. A cascading fold space collapse triggered simultaneously at 17 points along the Armada's formation. The Verkai ships hadn't had time to raise shields. Most of them hadn't even had time to change heading. It had taken 11 minutes to end a force. That had taken 4 decades to build. Counselor. Drea of the Mayathei Federation raised one of her delicate silver hands. We should not panic, she said, though her voice carried the tremble of someone who was already panicking and simply had not told her body yet. Humanity is a member of the Outer Accord. They are allies. This is a good outcome. The Verkai threat has been eliminated, said Kelvoth. Yes, but look at how it was eliminated, Counselor. Look at what they used. That fold space collapse technology, we have no record of it in any shared research database, which means humanity developed it independently, in secret, without informing the Council. The chamber fell quiet again. That was the part that none of them were saying out loud, but all of them were thinking. It wasn't just that humanity had won. It was that humanity had won using weapons no one knew they had. The humans had been part of the Galactic Council's Outer Accord for 63 years. 63 years of trade agreements, of cultural exchanges, of carefully managed diplomatic relationships. 63 years during which every other species had assumed humanity was roughly where they appeared to be. A young, energetic civilization with decent but unremarkable military capability. They had all been wrong. Ambassador Chen Lao arrived at the council chamber 3 hours after the broadcast. He walked in without an escort, which was unusual, dressed in the simple gray uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, carrying nothing but a data tablet. He was a small man, calm in the way that deep water is calm, not because nothing is happening beneath the surface, but because whatever is happening there doesn't need to show itself yet. He took his seat at the human delegation's table and looked around at the assembled representatives of 41 civilizations, all staring at him with expressions ranging from awe to barely concealed horror, and he smiled. Not a gloating smile. Something quieter than that. "I imagine you have questions," he said. "How?" said Kelveth, and the single word carried the weight of everything the chamber was feeling. Shen Lao set his tablet on the table. The Verkai issued an ultimatum to Earth 17 months ago. We didn't report it to the Council because we had already decided how we were going to respond. And we didn't want diplomatic interference slowing down the process. That is a violation of Outer Accord Article 14, subsection C. Yes, Xin Lao said. We know. We'll accept whatever review process the Council deems appropriate. He said it the way someone says they'll accept a mild inconvenience. Not dismissively, but with the absolute certainty of a person who knows the inconvenience changes nothing fundamental. The Verkai told us they would reach Earth in 18 months. We had 17 left by the time we finished reading the transmission. We used them to build that weapon, said Admiral Voss. To build several things, Shen Lao said. He did not elaborate immediately. He let that sit in the air of the chamber like smoke. Several things. The Council's analysts were already running projections, trying to estimate what that meant in practical terms. And none of the projections were comfortable. It was Councillor Drea who finally asked the question everyone was afraid to ask. Ambassador Chan Lao, is Earth safe? For the rest of us, I mean. Are we safe? The human ambassador looked at her for a moment. Then he said, that depends entirely on whether you're planning to threaten us. The silence that followed was the loudest the Council chamber had ever produced. Outside, the debris field in grid sector 77 Alpha continued to drift. 412 warships reduced to cooling metal and scattered light, turning slowly in the dark between stars. The monitoring stations recorded it all in meticulous detail. Every chunk of Verkai hull, every fading drive signature, every piece of a military empire that had taken 4 decades to build and 11 minutes to end. And in the databases of 41 civilizations, analysts and generals and diplomats and scientists were all pulling up everything they had ever filed on humanity, reading it with completely new eyes, and realizing with growing unease that they had fundamentally, completely, and perhaps dangerously misread the species sitting across from them at the negotiating table. Humanity had been quiet for 63 years. They had been busy. And as the Council chamber buzzed with hushed, urgent conversations, not one of the 41 ambassadors present could shake the feeling that what they had just witnessed, 412 ships, 11 minutes, 9 losses, was not humanity's great achievement. It was humanity's opening statement. The review committee convened within 48 hours, which was extraordinarily fast by Galactic Council standards. Normally, the bureaucratic machinery of 41 civilizations ground along at the pace of deep geology, slow, grinding, shaped more by the weight of competing interests than by any sense of urgency. Emergency sessions took weeks to schedule. Fact-finding committees took months to assemble. Decisions that actually changed anything took years, sometimes decades. It was the great irony of the Council's existence. A body designed to manage galactic civilization that moved with all the speed of a cooling planet. But the humans had destroyed 412 Verkai warships in 11 minutes. And suddenly everyone found the time. The committee was chaired by Kelvoth, who had slept approximately 3 hours in the previous 2 days, and whose composure was beginning to show the cracks of someone operating well outside his comfort zone. Beside him sat representatives from the 7 most powerful civilizations in the Council: the Sarin Collective, the Tharnic Union, the Maiathi Federation, the Ashan Directorate, the Pelhari Commonwealth, the Rex Sovereignty, and the Duvani Concord. Together, these 7 controlled roughly 80% of the Council's military and economic capacity. They had all arrived early. The human delegation consisted of 3 people: Ambassador Chun Lao, his aide, a young woman named Dr. Suki Tanaka, who appeared to be in her late 20s, and who had said nothing in any previous session, but watched everything with the focused attention of someone cataloging a battlefield, and a man who had been introduced simply as Director Harlan Price of Earth's Strategic Development Office. Price was broad, gray-haired, and had the flat, patient expression of someone who had spent a long career making difficult decisions and had long since made his peace with that fact. Kelvath opened the session with what he believed was a measured tone. Ambassador, the Council has completed a preliminary analysis of the engagement in Sector 77 Alpha. We have several concerns. Of course, said Chun Lao. The fold space collapse technology you deployed has no equivalent in any shared research archive. Our scientists estimate that developing such a weapon from theoretical foundations would require between 80 and 120 years of dedicated research. Humanity has been a spacefaring civilization for less than 200 years, and a council member for 63. This raises the obvious question of how we didn't start from theoretical foundations, said Director Price. Everyone at the table looked at him. He had not been expected to speak. He was not the ambassador. Price continued as if he hadn't noticed the stares. The theoretical foundations were already established. We started from applied engineering. It's faster. He said it the way a mechanic explains why a particular fix works, not to impress anyone, just stating the reality of the situation. You're telling us, said Admiral Voss of the Tharnic Union slowly, that humanity cracked fold space weaponization at the applied engineering stage, without going through the theoretical development phase? We had people working on both simultaneously, Price said. When you're told you have 17 months before an armada arrives at your home system, you don't wait for the theorists to finish before you let the engineers start building. The Ashan Directorate's representative, a tall insectoid figure named Arch-Commander Thesevic, leaned forward on all 4 of her primary limbs. Director Price, I want to be precise in my understanding. Are you saying that humanity had already developed the theoretical framework for fold space, collapse before the Verkai ultimatum? Price looked at her steadily. We'd had the framework for about 12 years. We'd been waiting for a practical application worth building it for. The silence in the committee chamber had a different quality than the silence in the main council hall 2 days earlier. That silence had been shock. This one was something more calculated. Every mind in the room was doing arithmetic, and no one liked where the numbers were landing. 12 years. A civilization that had been sitting on fold space collapse theory for 12 years and simply hadn't deployed it because they hadn't felt the need to yet. Councillor Drea of the Maiathi Federation broke the silence with a question she clearly didn't want to ask. What else are you sitting on? Chun Lao and Price exchanged a glance. It lasted perhaps 1 second. Then Chun Lao placed his hands flat on the table. Counselor, I want to be honest with you, because I think honesty is more useful to everyone here than diplomacy. Please, she said. Humanity's approach to scientific development is different from most council civilizations. Most of you research what you need when you need it. You have functional, well-maintained research programs that address current problems in order of priority. That's sensible. That's rational. He paused. We don't do that. We research everything, simultaneously, obsessively. We have been doing it since before we left our own solar system. We don't always know what we're going to use a discovery for, or when, or whether it will ever be practical. We just can't stop. It is, and I say this with full awareness of how it sounds, a compulsion. Desivek's mandibles clicked slowly. How many active research programs does Earth currently maintain? Dr. Tanaka, who had not spoken in any session until this moment, looked up from her tablet and said, across all branches of government, private institutions, and independent research bodies? Approximately 4,600,000. The number landed in the room like a dropped stone into still water. 4,600,000 research programs. The Soren Collective, the oldest and most scientifically advanced civilization in the Council, maintained roughly 800,000. The Tharnic Union, famous for their military engineering, had perhaps 400,000. Humanity, a civilization that had been in space for less than 2 centuries, was running more than 5 times as many concurrent research programs as the oldest species at the table. That's, Kelvath started. Inefficient, yes, Chenlao said. Most of them produce nothing immediately useful. Some of them produce things that are useful decades later. A small number produce things that change everything. We've found that we cannot predict in advance which programs will fall into which category, so we run all of them. Admiral Voss had gone very still. The Varkai ultimatum, he said carefully. You said you decided immediately how you were going to respond. You already had the weapons. We already had several options, Price confirmed. The fold space collapse was the cleanest. Minimal risk to our own forces, contained engagement zone, decisive outcome. And the others? Price looked at him for a long moment. The others were less clean. No one asked him to elaborate. No one particularly wanted to. The session continued for 6 more hours. By the end of it, Kelveth had a data pad filled with notes. A headache that no medicine in his personal kit was touching, and the growing, uncomfortable certainty that the Galactic Council had been operating under a fundamental misapprehension for 63 years. They had classified humanity as a promising but junior civilization, energetic, creative, occasionally difficult to manage, but ultimately manageable. A younger member at the table, enthusiastic, growing, what the data was telling him, with increasing clarity, was that humanity had never been junior. They had simply been young, and there is a profound difference between the two. Junior implies a hierarchy, that others are above you, more capable, further along. Young simply means you haven't finished yet. Humanity, Kelvath was beginning to understand, had never stopped Dot as the committee session ended and the delegations filed out into the corridor. He fell into step beside Chun Lao and said quietly, Ambassador, one last question. Off the record. Chun Lao nodded. The 9 ships you lost in the engagement. Were they crewed? Chun Lao stopped walking. He turned to look at Kelvoth with an expression that was difficult to read. Not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it. Like a person who finds a question more interesting than expected. No, he said. They were not. Kelvoth stood in the corridor for a long moment after the human ambassador walked away, staring at nothing, turning that answer over in his mind like a stone with something written on the other side. They had lost 9 ships. 0 personnel. The ships had been unmanned. Decoys, almost certainly. Part of the bait, which meant humanity had walked into a battle against the most feared military force in the galaxy, with full knowledge of what they were facing, and had suffered 0 casualties. Not 9. 0. He began walking again, more slowly than before, and behind his eyes, the arithmetic kept running. The leak happened on the 14th day, got someone inside the Tharnic Union's intelligence. Division passed a partial transcript of the committee hearings to a Galactic news relay, and within hours, the summary had jumped across every major communication network in the known galaxy. It didn't carry all the details. Whoever leaked it had enough sense to strip the most sensitive technical data, but it carried enough. 4 million research programs, 0 casualties, 9 unmanned ships, the fold space collapse, the quiet admission that other options had existed, and that those options had been described only as less clean. The reaction was not uniform. Some civilizations celebrated. The Vorkai had carved a path of destruction through the Outer Rim for 4 decades, and there were species that had lost colonies, lost ships, lost people to them. For those civilizations, the news that the Vorkai Armada was a debris field in Sector 77 Alpha was the closest thing to relief they had felt in a generation. Messages of gratitude arrived at the human embassy on Atheron Prime in numbers that overwhelmed the standard diplomatic inbox. Some of them were not even formal. Some of them were just ordinary people from species whose names most humans barely knew, who had found the embassy's public address and written short. Plain messages that said thank you, or we lost our homeworld to them, or my children will grow up safe because of what you did. Admiral Yara-chan read every one of them personally. It took 3 days. Other civilizations reacted differently. The Palhari Commonwealth issued a formal statement expressing deep concern about the implications of undisclosed military development by a council member. The Rex Sovereignty went further, calling for an immediate freeze on all human military expansion until a full audit could be completed. 3 smaller civilizations on the Inner Rim quietly began accelerating their own defensive research programs, which accomplished nothing strategically but made their governments feel better. An editorial published by the Ocean Directorate's primary news institution ran under the headline, "Who Gave Humanity Permission?" The answer, which the editorial did not engage with, was that no one had. No one had given humanity permission because humanity had not asked. And the question of whether they should have was more complicated than the editorial's tone suggested. Because the alternative, a humanity that moved slowly, that waited for council approval, that shared its research timelines and weapon development schedules with 41 other civilizations, was a humanity that might have spent the last 17 months in committee while in Armada, traveled toward Earth at maximum drive. Ambassador Chun Lao read the editorial, noted its concern, and filed a formal response that was polite, precise, and said absolutely nothing that could be used against Earth in any subsequent legal proceeding. Dr. Tanaka had written most of it. She was, Chun Lao had long understood, considerably more dangerous than she looked. The real pressure came from the Sarin Collective. Kelvoth called a closed session, not the full committee, just the 7 senior members, and he came to it with something he hadn't brought to any previous meeting, fear that he was willing to name out loud. We need to discuss what humanity represents as a long-term strategic reality, he said. He used the word strategic because it sounded more controlled than the word he had been privately using in his own head, which was threat. Vos of the Tharnic Union didn't bother with the gentler framing. They are the most militarily capable civilization currently in the Council, possibly in the galaxy. We don't know the full extent of their technology. We don't know what else they've built. We don't know what their long-term intentions are. Those are problems. Their long-term intentions are not a mystery, said the Duvani Concord's ambassador, a woman named Prithala, whose calm was genuine rather than performed. She was one of the few people in the room who had spent significant time on Earth. I've been to their planet. I've spoken to their people extensively. They're not expansionist in the way the Vorkai were. They're not building an empire. Then what are they building? Asked the SSIVEK.PRETALA thought about it for a moment. A guarantee, she said. They've been building a guarantee that nothing will ever come for them that they cannot handle. That no armada, no ultimatum, no force in the galaxy will ever be able to do to Earth what has been done to other civilizations. That's not aggression. That's the scar tissue of a species that read its history carefully and decided never to be helpless. The room was quiet. It doesn't make them less dangerous, Voss said finally. No, Prethala agreed. It doesn't. But it changes what the danger is. They're not dangerous to us because they want to conquer us. They're dangerous to us because they can, and knowing they can changes the entire balance of the Council, whether they ever choose to act on it or not. This was the problem, and no one in the room had a clean solution for it. 3 days later, Earth's ambassador Chun Lao requested time to address the full Council. The request was granted within hours, which in itself marked a change in the Council's relationship with humanity that everyone noticed and no one commented on directly. He arrived alone. He stood at the center podium, the one reserved for addresses of significance, the place where the announcements of wars and the signings of treaties had been made for 300 years. And he looked out at 41 species and took a breath. I understand there is fear, he said. I want to address it directly because I think it deserves that. Not a carefully drafted diplomatic statement, not a committee response, not a position paper. Just the truth, as plainly as I can give it. The chamber was very still. Humanity is not what you thought we were. We understand that. We have known for some time that the picture we presented to the Council was incomplete. Not dishonest. We never misrepresented a direct question, but incomplete. We did not share everything. We held things back. Research programs, development timelines, capability assessments. He paused. We held them back because we were afraid. That was not what anyone had expected him to say. Not afraid of you, specifically. Afraid of a galaxy that spent 4 decades watching the Vorkai grow because no one wanted to pay the cost of stopping them early. Afraid of a council that, through no malice but simple bureaucratic weight, moves too slowly to respond to existential threats in the time those threats actually allow. We did not hide our capabilities out of hostility. We hid them out of the same survival instinct that causes every species in this room to maintain, a weapon reserve they never put in the public ledger. He let that sit. Several ambassadors shifted uncomfortably. What I am here to tell you today is this. The Vorkai Armada was the largest organized military force currently active in the known galaxy. It no longer exists. That changes the threat landscape for every civilization in this room, including ours. Earth is prepared to discuss openly and in good faith what that change means and how we move forward from it together. We are prepared to share research. We are prepared to enter into genuine defense partnerships. We are prepared to be the kind of ally to this council that we have not been able to afford to be until now. He placed both hands on the podium. But I want to be honest about something else as well. If a new threat emerges, one that moves faster than committees, faster than review sessions, faster than diplomatic protocol, we will act. We will act before we ask permission. We will act because we cannot afford not to. And I believe, if you are honest with yourselves, that you are glad there is someone at this table who will. The silence stretched for a long time. Then, from the back of the chamber, the representative of the Falari, a small, rarely vocal civilization that had lost 3 colonies to the Vorkai over the past decade, stood up. She did not ask a question. She simply said, "Thank you." And she sat back down. It was not a vote. It was not a formal motion. It was one person from one small civilization saying 2 words. But across the chamber, something shifted. imperceptibly at first. But it shifted. Chen Lao stepped back from the podium, and for just a moment, before the formal responses began and the diplomatic machinery reasserted itself, he allowed himself a single quiet breath. The hard part was over. The complicated part was just beginning. 6 months after the debris field in Sector 77 Alpha had cooled, something unexpected arrived at the edge of the known galaxy. It did not announce itself. It did not broadcast a signal or send a diplomatic probe ahead of its arrival. It simply appeared at the outer boundary of mapped space. A single vessel of a configuration no database in the Council had ever catalogued, holding position at a distance calculated precisely to be just outside weapons range of every monitoring station in the Outer Rim. It sat there for 11 hours, doing nothing, as if it was waiting to see what would happen next. The Council's response was immediate, escalating, and almost instantly out of control. Emergency protocols activated across 14 star systems. Defense fleets were placed on standby. The full Council convened in less than 2 hours, which was the fastest anyone could remember. There was shouting in 4 languages before the session had technically begun. The word unknown, repeated over and over in the transcripts of those first hours, took on a weight that it didn't usually carry, not just unfamiliar, but genuinely outside the catalog of everything the galaxy's oldest civilizations had ever recorded. Admiral Yara. Chun received the notification while she was in the middle of a planning review at Earth's Fleet Command. She read the preliminary data twice, asked 2 questions, and then said very quietly to the officer standing next to her, "Get me a line to the Council, and wake up Director Price." The mystery vessel had still not moved by the time Chun Lao arrived at the emergency session. He came in as Kel'Thoth was midway through a controlled but clearly strained address to the assembled representatives, trying to hold the room together against the current of barely managed panic running through it. The sensor data on the main display showed the vessel in crisp, unsettling detail. It was large, not warship large, but large in the way that suggested it was built to be self-sufficient for a very long time. Its hull was made of something that absorbed most scanning frequencies rather than reflecting them, which meant that every scan produced only a rough surface outline and nothing of the interior. 41 civilizations, all their combined technology, and they could not see inside one ship. Kel'Thoth looked relieved when Chun Lao entered. He would never have admitted that publicly, but the relief was visible to anyone watching his face carefully. "Ambassador, we were about to dispatch a contact probe." "Don't," Chun Lao said. He said it calmly, without drama, and sat down. "Don't," Kel'Thoth repeated. "Send a message first. Voice, not probe. And I would suggest you let Earth send it." The room reacted. Several ambassadors spoke at once. Desivek's mandibles clicked in rapid agitation. The representative of the Rex sovereignty, who had been pushing for a military response from the moment the vessel appeared, stood up and said loudly that Earth did not have the authority to act as the Council's primary contact for an unknown entity without formal authorization. Chen Lao waited until the noise settled. Then he said, "You're right. We don't have formal authorization. Would you like to take a vote? Or would you like to find out what's in that ship before it decides we're not interested in talking?" The vote took 9 minutes. Earth was authorized to make first contact by a margin of 34-7. Admiral Yara Chun composed the message herself. She spent 12 minutes on it, which was not a long time to write the first words one civilization would ever say to another, but it was the right amount of time. She was not a diplomat. She was a fleet admiral who had spent her career making decisions under pressure, and this was a decision under pressure. She wrote it the way she made all her decisions, direct, honest, without theatrics. "Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Yara Chun of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You are in Council space. We don't know who you are. We would like to. If you are willing to communicate, we are ready to listen. If you are not, we would ask that you establish your intentions before we are forced to make assumptions about them. We are not looking for a fight. We are also not afraid of one. Your response will tell us a great deal about which situation we're in. The message was transmitted at standard communication frequency, with the secondary translation protocol that the Council used for all first contact scenarios. Attached to the carrier wave, there were 31 seconds of silence, and the unknown vessel responded. The signal was not on any standard frequency. It was not encoded in any protocol the Council database recognized. It was, in the most precise technical sense, noise, a burst of structured electromagnetic interference that made every piece of communication equipment on every monitoring station briefly register an error state. But inside that noise, running as a secondary pattern beneath the primary signal, was a single mathematical sequence. Prime numbers, base 10, extending to the first 5,000 primes. Not a message. A test. A question dressed as a statement. Do you recognize this? Dr. Tanaka was the one who caught it. She was monitoring the signal analysis feed alongside 6 Tharnic Union communications specialists, and she saw it 6 seconds before any of them did. She flagged it immediately, pulled it to the main display, and said 3 words. They're checking us. Sean Lao looked at the sequence. He looked at her. Response? Same sequence, she said. Then extend it. Show them we don't just recognize it, we can continue it. Show them we can think forward, not just reflect back. The response was transmitted within 90 seconds. Prime numbers, base 10, extended from where the unknown vessel's sequence had ended, running forward for another 1,000 primes. And at the end, a new sequence. Fibonacci, also base 10. Not a reflection. An addition. We heard you, and here is something else. And let's see what you do with it. The silence this time lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Then the unknown vessel began to move, not away. Toward it crossed the distance to the nearest monitoring station at a speed that should have been impossible without catastrophic energy expenditure. And it decelerated to a stationary position alongside. The station with a precision that suggested either extraordinary instrumentation or a level of control over its own. Physics that implied things no one in the council chamber wanted to think about too carefully yet. And then a new signal came. Not prime numbers. Not mathematical sequences. Something more complex, layered, structured in ways that the Universal Translation Protocol took nearly 20 minutes to begin parsing. But when it began to resolve, when the broad shapes of it started to emerge from the static, what it said, approximately, imperfectly, but recognizably, was, we came here because we heard what happened in Sector 77 Alpha. We came to see who did it. We have been watching this region of space for a long time, and nothing here has interested us. Something here interests us now. The council chamber erupted. It took Kelvith 6 minutes to restore enough order to speak. And when he did, his voice had the strained quality of a person holding together something that badly wanted to fall apart. He turned to Chun Lao, because that was what everyone in the room was doing, turning to the human ambassador, the way you turn toward a light source when you are standing in the dark. They came because of us, Chun Lao said quietly, before Kelveth could form a question. Because of what we did. They saw the engagement and they wanted to know who was capable of it. What does that mean for us? Kelveth asked. For the council? For the galaxy? Chun Lao thought about it for a moment. Behind him, on the main display, the unknown vessel held its position alongside the monitoring station. Patient and enormous, and waiting, the way something waits when it has all the time in the world, and has simply decided that this particular thing is worth waiting for. It means, he said slowly, that what we thought was the edge of the map was not the edge of the map. There are others out there, others who are watching and judging and waiting for someone worth the effort of contact. He paused, and apparently humanity just cleared that bar. Admiral Voss was staring at the display with an expression that had moved beyond fear into something that was either wonder or its close neighbor. The 9 ships, he said. The 11 minutes. They were watching that. They were watching all of it, Shun Lao said. Probably for a long time before that. The chamber was very quiet. Outside, in the black between stars, the unknown vessel waited, patient, curious, the way something is curious when it has seen many things and has finally found one that surprises it. And in the council chamber, the arithmetic that Kelveth had been running for 6 months finally resolved into something he could put into words, though the words were not comforting in any simple sense. They were vast and open-ended and full of implication. The way a horizon is when you realize for the first time that it is not a wall but a distance. Humanity had not ended a war. Humanity had started an introduction, and out there, beyond the boundary of everything the Council had ever mapped, the galaxy was large and old, and full of things that were only now deciding to look back.